We are continuing some work this week that's on, very similar to last week. This is on the graphemes of long A. We are working in Kit K Theme J. There's a lot of similarities to the work we did last week, so I'm not sure if there's one you should do before the other. This one offers less examples. There's fewer graphemes to represent than the E graphemes we worked with last week, but I do think that doing them sort of one after another like this, it builds the skills for kids because they're really going to know the processes that you can work through. So just a review from last week. The emphasis here is for kids to know that whether a vowel is long or short can make a difference to the meaning of the word. And so when we get especially younger writers or readers, they're just trying out either short or long, and instead of thinking about meaning. So these are some examples that we can show kids that just one addition of a letter can affect the meaning of a word. When we're doing spelling out, we want to remember to put the digraphs together, so it's not P-A-I-N, but P-A-I-N, in order to reinforce that they go together. Let's see. So the letter A alone can represent a long phoneme. There are also graphemes of more than one letter for the long A. And of course, make sure they have the vowel hands. Don't just think about isolated letters, but check the neighbors. And digraphs are strings of letters that represent a single unit of the spelling system. And in this, we actually look at a trigraph as well. So, let's see here. I've got stuff everywhere. One of the things last week that I showed was how you could sort of build out a poster, and I did that again this week, just slightly differently. I started with thinking if you had worked with E already, and this may only apply to the upper grades, I don't know. If you had already worked with long E, you could just jump right into an investigation and remind students that they found all this out about the long E phoneme, and so they can go and hunt, and you're betting there are graphemes out there, so let's go find them. So you may be able to just dump them in it a little quicker and let them find their way out. So I've set up this poster as if it was an investigation that I was running with kids, and I'm going to build it out for you the way they might build it. This is on the server, and it's sort of a more wordy way of explanation that could even be assigned. Again, you'd have to look at it for developmental appropriateness, but I was thinking about my own daughter who's in grade 5, and if I gave her this paper and said, get to work, and she had a week to do the work, I think she could do it with these directions. It reminds her of what we did with the E and then leads her off. But basically, what about long A? Let's investigate. So find words with long A and list the graphemes used, those letters used. And I was thinking we could get kids to look in their books for those words. They may remember some, but then get them looking in their books. Find and write other words which use the graphemes for long A. This is one of the steps that Pete and Melvin recommend because you shouldn't just look at one example. You need to find multiple examples. Study the collection to see where the graphemes are used, so the positioning in the word, initial, medial, or final, and any patterns, and then make a chart to show your learning and thinking. So I'm going to model this for you right now as if a child did it, okay? So, and that should be, let me just make sure it's in the, yeah, okay. So I started with these words here that I put, let's pretend, I started with these words. These were words I recognized. When I read them out, the sound I was hearing was a long A sound. So I made sort of a list, and I recognized that there's the letter A, the digraph AI, the digraph AY, the digraph EY, and the trigraph IGH. Then I went and found other words to support this, to make sure that that happened, not just in one case, but in multiple cases. All of these words here were given to me by Melvin, so I actually didn't do this work, but a student easily could, okay? And I added one here just so that I could look at the position. The next step then, once I have a collection and I can sort of say, yes, this isn't a one-time shot, is to make some observations about what I notice. So that I did here just for clarity. The A by itself seems to need an A consonant vowel to make the long A sound. So I was noticing that here. Of course, I know this was the E that was changed here, but there's always a vowel following a consonant. So this was an observation I made. I also noticed that it can be in the initial and the medial position. acorn being the initial that I located, but I didn't ever find it in the final position. Again, my own investigation.
When you're speaking to kids, are you using the words initial and medial rather than beginning and middle?
Yes, he does recommend that.
Okay.
Because I think middle tends to cut it, whereas medial could be, it's somewhere in that middle part.
Okay.
Yeah. That was his recommendation. It'd be good to check with others and see how they're doing it, but that's the way I remember him recommending it for sure. So then when I looked at the AI digraph, I found a lot of these. That was one of my first, the first things that I noticed was this is often found in my textbooks and certainly in Melvin's list. Many of these are homophones with words that have the letter A itself. Another interesting thing. I noticed that these are in the initial and the medial position, but they're not used in the end. If they're in the end, it's the AY, which made me think that these two are connected because I have my spelling law that I know really well that says a word can't end in I. So even if I wanted to, the sound is there, but I know that it can't end in I, so maybe that's where we're using this AY. So maybe these are a little bit connected. The next one was the EY. These weren't as easy to find, a little bit rare. Usually, let's see, that was it. They're usually used for the long A. If you have a digraph EY, which we're more often going to find it for a long, I think I meant long E there, a long E sound than an A sound was what Melvin said. It's always in the final position, and this was one of the first instances where I can start to talk to kids about British spellings, which our clientele for sure comes across, and they need to recognize that both happens. They may write one form just by nature of being surrounded by people that are doing it. The IGH trigraph was one that Melvin talked about in the theme. It may not be one that we want to go straight into with little kids, however, they see it. They already get it, so someone may find it and want to put it up there. This is the vowel, E or A plus IGH, that can make a long A. Some of these words are very, very common, like 8 for sure. I'm thinking about first graders, right? They're going to run into that. There's much more on this in Kit 2A, and I want to say it's our next week kit. So if this doesn't come up naturally, or if you just get started and don't want to go much further, it is something that we're going to work on in the next kit. So then, thinking about the investigation that I did with kids. So they've built this, they've done all of their thinking, and then I want them to think about what it is they see. So this is an example of a chart, and the teacher could do this with the kids if it was teacher directed. A chart of my thinking. There are 5 ways to write long A. Such a mind-blowing idea rather than just one. And these are the ways. This is my little positioning chart, which I modeled off what Melvin did, but this is me doing the work and me doing the thinking. Let's see. A and a vowel, and AI have homophones. AY too if it's in the final. So there's some homophone ideas here that I have to keep in my head. And the AI, AY idea about the English spelling law that they can't end in I is important. Okay. So that'll help me with spelling and reading. And EY is rare and should not be a first choice. This isn't happening that often, so this shouldn't be the first thing I apply when I'm trying to spell a word. Then, this is something that teachers could use, again, under the alphabet charts, to show that A is not just for apple, but if we're talking about a long A, and I found these, just also to illustrate a little bit for little kids. Last week I just used words and I drew my own pictures, but we could have kids find photos of these things to represent, to help solidify the idea that there's many representation, several graphemes for the phoneme.
Okay. Here, Jen, the kids should know that EIG is A. Combination 3 letters make A sound, right?
No, it's the vowel and the combination of letters.
Oh, okay.
Because, and there's no here, but A can also do it.
Okay.
Can make the A sound.
Yes.
So they are in this instance, but I think the IGH, I wouldn't go any further than that until we get into next week's theme.
Okay.
And if they come to you and I think the practice that I've adopted through this framework that's really been good for my teaching and I think good for learners is I don't try to overdo it. If I don't know, I say I don't know.
Of course, I say so.
Yeah.
I say I don't know.
And
yeah.
and I don't try to make a case for everything until I'm really, really sure. I say,
Yeah, of course.
in this word it does, and I've found some examples,
Okay.
but I'm not gonna make anything in stone
Okay.
until I can certainly prove it. And I
I
think
see.
Melvin would recommend that too, because it's
Okay.
the in stone pieces that we get that messes people up, because then we find an exception.
That's right.
Which could be explained in other ways, but we get kids glommed on onto
Okay.
things, and then
Okay.
they follow our lead.
Okay.
What would be good is that these keep coming back each year, because, so like this theme will be introduced this year and then again next year?
No, not at all grades, no. This is, we're laying a foundation. It doesn't mean that they can't teach this theme if their kids need it, but like fifth graders, for example, they know this by virtue of being readers and writers at this point. They don't know the whys, we're giving that a little bit, but they're not getting stumped on most of these
Okay.
words. Now, some kids still are, and they do interchange them, and they don't know the reason, so we can address those as they need it.
Okay.
But in general, this is gonna be a theme that's introduced in kindergarten and first grade, and everybody else will use it as they need to,
Okay.
okay? And I'm answering that as if I know, like I have a future, a ball, that's our plan. We may get into it next year and recognize that the plan isn't working, so we're trying to keep this flexible as we go, but that's our idea at this point, okay?
Thank you so
All right.
much. That is.
So what I want